Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. A burning call. God calls us from our zones of comfort to go to those places where we may not be comfortable, in order that we might help to comfort others. Many years had elapsed since Moses fled Egypt. Before he became a fugitive from Egypt, Moses had the privilege of growing up in the palace of the king of Egypt as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. He must have received the best of what Egypt had to offer, but the time came when Moses had to flee from Egypt and the wrath of Pharaoh. Having fled from Pharaoh, Moses settled in the land of Midian. He met and married Zipporah, daughter of the priest of Midian. They had a son, whom Moses named Gershom. It could be said that Moses had found relative comfort in Midian. He was settled with a family and was occupied as a shepherd. Then, one day, Moses saw and heard something that would transform all of this. It might have started out like any ordinary day in Moses' life, only that Moses saw something extraordinary, something strange. His attention was arrested by this strange phenomenon. A messenger of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Moses decided to turn aside and look more closely at this great sight and see why the bush was burning but not burning up. Why the bush was aflame but was not being consumed, as depicted here today. And we thank those who arranged the sanctuary so that we can have some visual impression of what Moses must have seen. We are reminded by this story that the call of God came to Moses in his zone of comfort. Moses was settled and comfortable after fleeing Egypt. For a time, he was like a nomad, a migrant, or a wanderer, until he joined the family of the Midianite priest. The years since fleeing Egypt had multiplied behind him, and Moses was probably not thinking of returning to Egypt in the foreseeable future. The priest of Midian not only had 7 daughters, one of which he gave to Moses as a wife, he also had sheep and goats, enough to keep his son-in-law occupied, so that his daughters could stay at home and not have to contend with shepherds who would drive their sheep away after they went through the trouble of drawing water to fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Moses was growing his own family in Midian. And one day, while leading the flock of his father-in-law Jethro out to pasture, an angel appeared to him, a messenger of God appeared to him in the midst of a burning bush. And God summoned Moses to go on a mission to Egypt. The call of God is like this, my brothers and sisters. It comes when we feel settled and comfortable and occupied. God doesn't call people to certain tasks just because they don't have a life, or because they have nothing to do, or no one for whom to live. As in the case of Moses, the call of God comes in the midst of a burning bush, in the fever of life, when we have all kinds of other things going on, family obligations and work demands, when there are things that are occupying our time and we are busy and active, God calls us in those circumstances to be part of God's mission. And when we consider the story of the call of Moses a little more, we are reminded that the call of God was for Moses to go to those in a place where they had no comfort. The call of God came to Moses in his comfort zone, where he was settled, where he was occupied, and things were going well for him. And he was called by God to go to a place and to people who did not have any comfort. What was this mission to which God called Moses? He was to go to people who were not living in comfort. Moses must leave the land where he had grown comfortable to go to people about whom God said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me. I have also seen how the Egyptians oppressed them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. This is what God says about the Israelites in Egypt. And it is to those people that Moses was called to go. And from what the text says, we have a picture of people who were living under an extremely oppressive regime and experiencing terrible hardship. They were wretchedly unhappy or uncomfortable. To those people, Moses was called to go. As in the case of Moses, my sisters and brothers who are here today and those who are watching this live stream and those who will view later, God calls from the midst of the burning bush, the crucible of suffering, for us to go to those whose situation might be in stark contrast to ours. Moses was comfortable, living out his days in relative ease. Now God summoned him to go to people who are not having it easy, people who are being oppressed, people who are enslaved, people who are experiencing life as misery. So, my sisters and brothers, God calls us to a mission to those who cry out in their misery and suffering and pain, to help bring them relief and deliverance. And as we think of the story even more, we see something else. We are reminded that the call of God caused Moses some discomfort, but God offered his assurance and comfort. The call of God that Moses heard from that burning bush caused him some discomfort, but God offered Moses assurance and comfort. It is obvious from a reading of the story that Moses wasn't very comfortable with the assignment that God had given him. The text says, "But Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?'" Perhaps he felt inadequate, incapable, or even afraid. And that's the way it is, my sisters and brothers, when the call of God comes. When God calls us to a mission, when God calls us into service, there are times when we might feel incapable, inadequate, limited, and even afraid. Like Moses, individuals might be inclined to shirk, evade, or make excuses because the call disturbs their comfortable existence and challenges them to go into daunting or intimidating situations. As in the case of Moses, God calls from the midst of a burning bush, the source of inexhaustible power and inconsumable energy, to be part of the mission to deliver others from situations that crush them and threaten to ruin their lives. That burning bush that was on fire but was not consumed is a reminder that God is a God of unlimited power and energy and strength. And we can draw from God's power. So even though the task was unnerving to Moses and brought him some discomfort, God assured and comforted him with these words, "I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain." So I say to you, my beloved brothers and sisters, today as we hear that burning call, let us awaken from our comfortable places and go into those difficult situations where God might lead us to help those who are there in those difficult situations, living out their lives in misery and pain and hardship and suffering. Let us be obedient as Moses was, knowing that God is with us, and we can rely on God's unlimited power and wisdom as we seek to make a difference in those places that need our presence, that need to be transformed. So may God help us to be attentive, to be sensitive, and to be responsive to that call, to leave our comfortable zones, to go to places where people are not so comfortable, to assist them, knowing that we will be comforted by the presence and the power of God In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.